let's talk about, can crypto miners make the world greener? And this is actually kind of fun because we just talked about Stronghold Digital and how they're basically taking care of the coal waste to reduce their power cost. Let's get into this opinion piece and see how it's going. Around 15,000 cryptocurrency mining rigs are humming away at Hive Blockchain's 30 megawatt data center in Boden, Sweden. But not all the time. Sometimes the facility powers down to help the local grid. This is something common that's been happening in Texas as well. So Texas is providing incentives to Bitcoin miners to shut off their rigs. There are even in some cases, this previous winter that I was informed of, where the Bitcoin miners were actually making more money by turning off their rigs and supplying power back to the grid than they were making on just mining Bitcoin. This is actually a pretty fascinating kind of portion of cryptocurrency mining, especially from a business perspective, because essentially what it turns into, which is really interesting, is that it turns into almost like a battery. So you have, let's say, basically you have a power grid that kind of produces a certain amount of power and demand goes up and down for that power. Well, that's because either basically the people within that community have certain peak times of power usage, and over seasons, depending on like how many people are running their heater or their air conditioning, they'll have peak times there. That's why you may see like your electric company request that you install a smart thermostat that they have control over so that they can basically turn down your power consumption at any given time. The way Bitcoin mining really resolves this is that essentially for the power company, they have a whole bunch of wasted energy just prepared and waiting for that spike in power consumption, right? So there's basically just a ton of wasted energy. Who can use energy 24/7? Well, Bitcoin miners can utilize energy 24/7. So the power companies can work with the Bitcoin miners to basically keep that usage up on the low demand times, and they request that they shut them off during high demand times to provide power back to the network and accommodate that high power consumption point in time. This actually does mean that you're wasting less energy, which in theory, as far as I see it, means that you are basically greener than if you were just providing all that energy waiting for the high load times. At least you are not wasting all of the potential. So it's kind of interesting the way this is playing out. The data center drawing cheap energy from the local hydropower producers acts as one of the largest, if not the largest, active energy reserves the Swedish grid can call upon whenever there are major disturbances to the local power supply. The facility can shut down its machines almost instantaneously so that energy can quickly be diverted to public use. Quote, in 5 seconds, we have to power down half of what we have allowed into the system, end quote, said Johanna Thornblad, Hive Blockchain's Sweden country president. Quote, and within 30 seconds, the entire power supply that is being requested has to be participating in the FCR-D system, end quote, the frequency containment reserve for disturbances that keeps the lights on in the region. When managed like that, the energy demand of Hive's mine is an asset to the local electricity grid. The miners are a stable source of cash flow when public energy consumption is low, but can power off during peak hours. The mutually beneficial relationship between the Hive facility and the local grid shows another side to the well-worn story of crypto mining's environmental consequences. A popular narrative among politicians, media, and the industry's most vocal critics is that mining is cooking the earth. Miners have indeed been known to bring fossil fuel plants back from the twilight zone, thanks to their insatiable and indiscriminate thirst for cheap power. Bitcoin is therefore said to be gobbling up the world's precious energy and consequently responsible for large amount of carbon emissions. Quote, you cannot waste energy sustainably, end quote, Pete Housen, a senior lecturer in the Geography and Environmental Sciences Department at the UK's Northumbria University, I probably said that wrong, told CoinDesk, aptly summarizing the critics' view. Globally, Bitcoin mining alone consumes 136 terawatt hours per year. Estimates the Cambridge University Center for Alternative Finance. That's about the same amount of electricity as Argentina, the United Arab Emirates, or Sweden. But that's only about half of what data centers run for other purposes consume, which the International Energy Agency, IEA, puts at 200 to 250 terawatt hours. And this is what I've been saying about proof of stake that a lot of people are not getting, that you need to understand. Proof of stake requires that you're up 24/7. Because of that, you're most likely going to go with one of the big 3 providers of virtual private servers currently available, which is going to be Amazon, Google, or Microsoft. They are consuming a lot more power in basically hardware that is not being utilized to have basically backups available for your VPS that's staking, right? So essentially the way this works, just to give you guys an idea, this is what I used to do for a living. So you have a data center that has multiple servers in it, and you have something called failover. So at all times you have a piece of hardware that is on and running, consuming power, waiting for your staked virtual private server, your staked basically server on another server to fail and go over to it. Depending on the amount of redundancy, that will create basically the amount of unused hardware that is being utilized there. In cryptocurrency mining, this doesn't happen because if your rig goes down, you're just going to try to repair it. The cryptocurrency mining hardware, you don't have failover. You're essentially trying to run the machines 24/7. So in a sense, and because of course they aren't what I would call necessarily always the most efficient, they're not efficiency driven at these large companies. They're definitely failover driven. You do have more of a waste of power, in my humble opinion, than you do in cryptocurrency mining specifically. And that is just due to the way the infrastructure is built, right? It would be like if you had 2 S19s and you kept both of them running, but you were only making money on one. That's the concept, right? And then if that one failed, it would fail over and start making on the second one while you built up and repaired the other one. And that's just like I'm trying to make it as basic of a concept as possible so you understand. Let me know. Of course, definitely disagree and we can chat about it, but US and European lawmakers have been making arguments such as the ones mentioned above when scrutinizing the environmental impact of Bitcoin mining. Last week, proof of work mining used by the Bitcoin network narrowly escaped its demise in the European Union. Lawmakers voted down a proposal that would have banned proof of work mining, but made allowances for protocols such as Ethereum that were transitioning to other verification methods that consume less electricity, like proof of stake. Concurrently with these criticisms, the Bitcoin mining industry has shifted dramatically towards renewables. Estimates of how much Bitcoin mining is powered by renewables range from 40 to 75%. The New York Times reported in September of 2021. A report by Crypto Asset Management from CoinShares found that as of December of 2021, renewables contributed under 30% of the total energy consumed by the Bitcoin network, with nuclear power responsible for 11% of the total and natural gas contributing another 24%. It's important to understand that natural gas is even more wasteful and actually damaging to the environment if you're not utilizing it. So why is that? Well, basically what happens is that you have pipes that carry the natural gas, right? Well, the amount of pressure in the pipes has to be regulated so that you don't have bursting pipes and so on. So when the natural gas is coming out and being produced, they have essentially what's known as flare gas. What do they do with flare gas? Well, they release this natural gas and burn it off. It's estimated to be about 20% of the entire production of natural gas is burned off in flare gas. What cryptocurrency miners are doing here in Texas is taking that additional 20%, and using it for natural gas generators to power their Bitcoin miners. This way, the natural gas company can not only monetize that natural gas, but you can utilize that there. As far as emissions go, your emissions are probably cleaner from the natural gas generators, and I don't know exactly, but my understanding is it's at least cleaner and you're at least not wasting it when you just burn it off right at the plant. So when we're talking about the environment, when we're talking about efficiency and we're talking about green technologies, we need to account for waste. And what Bitcoin mining is doing, and cryptocurrency mining in general is doing, is reducing waste. While proof of stake is increasing waste, because once again, we go back to the idea that if you have a server that is basically running your proof of stake node, if it goes down, there always has to be another server that's being wasted and just utilizing energy without doing anything, waiting for your server to fail over to it. Okay? So waste is an important argument when we're discussing this. What Bitcoin mining has been doing is proving that it can suck up the energy waste. That is what's been happening. So just because natural gas isn't necessarily the cleanest or renewable energy in general, it's better than wasting 20% and burning it off and damaging the environment anyways. Although carbon emissions from mining have been growing overall with the industry, they have decreased relative to megawatt hours of electricity used and terahashes of computing power produced, CoinShares found. More than cleaning up its own act in the process of decarbonization, the crypto industry might help energy producers build more renewable energy that the rest of society can use. For many miners, using renewable sourced electricity makes a lot of economic sense. Overall, renewable energy is cheaper than fossil fuels, so it can preserve miners' profit margins. Quote, generally speaking, electricity from renewables is as competitive, if not cheaper, than fossil fuel-based electricity, end quote, said Jesse Morris, CEO of EnergyWeb, a U.S. company that is helping a consortium of miners build transparency around their energy sources, known as the Crypto Climate Accord. Not only are fossil fuels more expensive, but they are vulnerable to external price shocks such as the war in Ukraine. An interesting dynamic emerging from the conflict is that with fossil fuel prices through the roof, renewable energy is often more attractive, said Mellerud. Quote, we will likely see more miners moving towards renewables due to this shock. Housen, who studies the social and environmental impact of Bitcoin mining, is skeptical of such arguments. The fact that renewable energy is not produced 24/7, 365 days a year makes it less attractive to miners, he said. Quote, every minute the sun's not shining or wind's not blowing or it's dry season, so no hydro, they're losing money, end quote, he told CoinDesk. Miners have another incentive to move toward cleaner energy sources. They can, quote, lower their cost of capital since they have better chance of attracting institutional investors that operate under ESG mandates, end quote, said Jaron, researcher at Oslo-based Arcane Research. Quote, environmental, social, and governance, end quote, is a set of criteria for making investments that looks at social goals in addition to financial returns. Companies, especially those traded on public markets, are under pressure to decarbonize, said John Belizaire, CEO of Soluna. As miners went public, their energy consumption became public information. And as you might imagine, no company, especially in the public market, is immune to ESG pressures. We are all in the role at this point in the back of a Tesla moving in the right direction, end quote. And that's a fair point because you are incentivized as a miner to move towards renewables right now. Once again, if you want to move to renewables as a country or as a society, you don't want to put in negative rules that impact people poorly. What you want to do is put in incentives for the behavior that you basically want. So you put in the incentives for the renewables, and naturally people will follow over in that direction. And because the largest basically expense of any miner is going to be power, all you really have to do is place that incentive accordingly, and the miners will naturally gravitate towards it, right? If a miner intending to be green joins the industry, fossil fuel powered miners, such as players using coal in Kazakhstan or gas powered ones in Texas, are incentivized to increase their energy consumption to keep up, Housen said. A growing way of using renewable energy to power mining is through what can be called behind the meter solutions. That's when an electricity producer connects a couple or a couple thousand mining rigs close to an energy asset, so the power goes directly to the miners instead of going through the grid and its meters. A fair amount of the world's renewable energy is stranded or curtailed, meaning it is located far from demand and there's no good way to transmit it to regions with high usage. As a result, producers might turn off or limit their energy production. California clocked 1.5 terawatt hours of curtailed energy from wind and solar in 2021, according to the state's grid operator. In addition, a lot of energy dissipates when it is transmitted over long distances, so it makes economic sense to consume it where it is produced, said Proof of Work Energy co-founder Alejandro de la Torre, whose company Crypto builds and mines, around Europe. For example, in northern Norway, electricity prices are about 10 times less than the southern part of the country because there is an abundant hydroelectric power, but barely any industry or population to consume it. Quote, the energy production in the north and the potential for the most production is so much higher than the local demand for the energy and the capacity to export it to other areas, end quote. Peterson, CEO of Oslo-based miner CryptoVault, told CoinDesk. However, countries around the world are working to develop better transmission lines such that energy can be consumed or exported. Germany will spend $55 billion on such projects by the end of 2030, estimates the Federal Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Thanks to the abundant hydroelectric energy, northern Norway, which is not directly connected to the rest of Europe, has been impervious to sharp uptick in energy prices in the south of the country and doesn't expect any increase soon, said Oleg Blinkov, head of data center development and operations at Bitfury, one of Europe's largest miners. CryptoVault is considering establishing facilities there to soak up the excess energy. The same is true for northern Sweden, where cheap, abundant energy has attracted everything from Facebook data centers to crypto mining operations to the region. Bitcoin mining can act as a demand-side response to the problem of curtailed or stranded energy. The grid is having a real challenge integrating large amounts of power, Belizaire said. Three things are needed to fix this problem: transmission capacity, flexible loads, and energy storage, he said. The IEA estimates that another 500 gigawatts of demand responses need to be brought online by 2030 to achieve net zero carbon emissions globally by 2050. That's a tenfold increase compared to the capacity of demand-side response brought online in 2020. Demand responses try to balance the grid by reducing energy consumption to match the supply. The next decade will be messy, Morris said. Power grids will become increasingly complicated as they integrate growing array of energy sources. Quote, it's going to get worse before it gets better, end quote, he said, adding that crypto mining should be a necessary part of the solutions available to energy suppliers. Housen countered that overall mining is encouraging fossil fuel energy production more than it is promoting renewable energy. All right, so for every farmer plugging in a few ASICs into their biodigester, there's an entire fossil fuel power plant reopening to satisfy Bitcoin's energy demands, he said. Trade groups who tout the former type of miner are simply engaging in, quote, a massive greenwashing drive, end quote, he said. Ultimately, the industry is delaying grid transitions to renewables by making oil and gas industries more profitable, Housen said. Increasing the proportion of wind and solar energy in the grid will increase the need for energy reserves that can be tapped on demand, like Hive's Bowden mine that can power on and off, Mellerud said. Quote, these energy sources are variable and not controllable as they only generate power when the weather allows it, he said. In other words, the supply of energy becomes less flexible the more wind and solar is integrated into the grid, such that the demand side has to make up for the difference. Another interesting model is that manufacturing facilities such as clothing factories can use any excess energy that they didn't spend during the manufacturing process to power in-house Bitcoin miners, De La Torre said. This is happening, for example, in Spain, he said. For Erik Thedéen, the Swedish financial regulator who called for a ban on proof-of-work mining in the European Union, miners are using electricity that would otherwise be available for other industries. Quote, this energy is urgently required for the development of fossil-free steel, large-scale battery manufacturing, and the electrification of our transport sector, end quote, he wrote in November. Indra Overland, head of the energy program at the Norwegian Institute of International Affairs, agrees with his standpoint, adding that even if miners used energy in places where there is an abundance of it, they would still be competing against other industries also looking to take advantage of cheap renewables. Quote, the energy transition requires a reorganization of many sectors, end quote, Overland said in an email to CoinDesk on February. This process is already going and will accelerate in the coming years. Many energy-intensive industries will move to locations where there is abundant clean energy. Clogging up the locations with cryptocurrency mining will slow down this process. The unique nature of miners' energy consumption profile is so good for soaking up curtailed energy that it is hard for other industries to compete, said SAI Tech CEO Arthur Lee, whose firm develops technology to make mines more efficient and green. Clean energy stations are mostly built in remote places which attract energy consumers who have mobility and huge power demand. Miners fit into this profile perfectly. These unique characteristics are advantages for energy producers looking to balance their grid loads, said Andrew Weber, founder and CEO of Digital Power Optimization, which helps energy producers balance their load and maximize profits using a host of solutions. It doesn't require high latency internet connections, which might not be available at remote edges of the world where renewable power plants are, and also doesn't need to be running at all times, unlike other types of consumer data centers, he said. Exactly, which once again, we go back to proof of stake, proof of work. And because you're going to be going into data centers like Amazon and Google, they have requirements of 24/7 uptime. They have basically additional servers running. This was the point that I was talking about earlier, and they're getting into it now. If Amazon or Google plop down and build a data center and buy power from a power producer, first of all, they want the power 24/7, he said. They never want to shut off because Instagram photos, web applications, and the CIA's data is there on their servers, and they need that data to be up 24/7. They can't have glitches. They can't have downtime. Automating the process through which mines turn on and off is key to balancing the grid because it allows adjustments without delays caused by human error, maximizing the benefit to consumers, said Greg Dixon, CEO of Voltus, a firm that digitally aggregates power suppliers and consumers into one virtual system to more efficiently balance loads. According to Henrik Julin, head of power management at Vattenfall, one of Sweden's largest state-owned power companies and a major energy supplier to the Hive facility in Boden, flexible electricity use is an effective way to support stable frequency in the power grid. Julin added that Hive Bikupa data center is one of Sweden's largest contributors to FCR. The Swedish national grid operator can call on the Hive data center in Boden to power down a portion of its mining operations at least once a month to balance the local grid. In the facility, energy use is divided into thousands of small units or machines that can be powered off one by one or all at once, according to Marin Baksa, site manager at the Hive blockchain data center in Boden. By comparison, a steel factory, which has to maintain certain temperatures in an assembly line, might have a harder time powering off quickly, Baksa added. Quick responses, like the ones automated crypto mines can bring, are valued higher than slower ones, Dixon said. Bitcoin miners are willing to curtail their activity for about 100 hours per year, which is when the value of curtailing exceeds the value of mining, i.e. when it's more profitable to give power to the grid than to use it for mining, Dixon said. This was what I was also referring to earlier as well. These can be days when there is really high demand, for example, due to a heat wave. The miners can use excess renewable energy locally to speed up the rate of return on investment and attract more clean power investors, Lee wrote in an email. Storing electricity instead of using it for mining comes with several caveats, not least of which is the battery technology that has been infamously static for the past few years. In south of Spain, energy producers are not getting very much out of selling electricity to the grid, said Vincent Burke, CEO of Solar in Spain, which develops small-scale photovoltaic installations. Burke said that for every 3 units of electricity he sends the grid, he receives 1 credit. Quote, so the value of that kilowatt becomes a third of what it is if you use it, end quote, he said. Adding that storing extra electricity in a battery is usually expensive because lithium, which is a key material in batteries, is pricey. Quote, if you don't use the energy that is produced, then you need to store it somewhere, Hives told Data Center. But when you create batteries after the period of expiration of the battery, you create a lot of waste. So not sure that anyone is going in that direction, he said. The pros and cons of crypto mining and batteries are different, Weber said. For energy producers, batteries capture the difference in value between the low and high price. You charge them up when the price of power is low, and then you discharge your batteries when the price of power is high. So what you capture is the spread between those two prices, he explained. This is important, guys. By contrast with crypto mining, what you want is more or less consistent low power. Ideally, you have a really low power all day long and all night long, Weber said. So where someone places a battery might be the same place a crypto mine, place for a crypto mine, but maybe not, he said. Belizaire said mines are, in a sense, better than batteries because they add load instantaneously that can be directly converted into a different asset. A battery absorbs the electrons and then has to re-output the electrons to the same point where it's connected. It can only do that during certain periods, and sometimes those periods for its business model don't conflict with what the grid needs, end quote, he said. Housen scoffs at such comparisons. The idea that Bitcoin will function like a battery in that miners can act as a buyer of last resort, converting and storing the electricity as financial energy is absolute bollocks, he said. I disagree, but all right. So the crypto mining merger, the incentives between energy producers and miners are so aligned that soon it might be difficult to draw a line between the two. More energy firms entering mining while miners are accumulating their own energy supply. Voltus has created models to determine exactly how much flexibility is worth to crypto miners. In Texas, $37.53 per megawatt hour, whereas New England is $6.69 per megawatt hour. That doesn't seem right. Okay, hold on. Anyways, let's go. Energy companies that stay out of Bitcoin mining will leave money on the table because mining most of the time is much more profitable than selling energy to the grid, he said. Based on his research during mining's super profitable 2021, energy producers could have earned more than 10 times the cash flow by mining Bitcoin than selling their energy to the grid, he said. Dario Ruiz, who installs photovoltaics with solar in Spain, said that although energy prices have increased to 14 cents per kilowatt hour for consumers due to the conflict in Ukraine, producers are still paying around 5 to 6 cents per kilowatt hour. DPO's Weber said that in 5 to 10 years, all big crypto mines will have to generate their own power generation capacity to maintain cost-competitive operations. Quote, if they don't, the people that own the power gen can do this, he said. Belizaire agreed broadly, but stopped short of saying that miners that don't supply their own power would eventually be priced out. Quote, as the industry scales and the approach and model starts to take off, it's likely that vertical integration of renewables in this industry will be an important strategic advantage. The materials used to build mines are also contributing to the industry's carbon footprint. Several miners, which are auditing their carbon footprint, are looking comprehensively at their operations, even as they focus on energy consumption, Morris said. And some are finding ways to save energy in their data center designs, software systems, and contracting and financial structuring. Morris added that most of the criticism of Bitcoin's carbon footprint has veiled a way of saying, I don't believe in Bitcoin. Decarbonizing the network might not actually satisfy these critics, he said, and that's a fair point. Asked whether a fully renewable energy-powered Bitcoin mining network would be acceptable in terms of its carbon footprint, Northumbria University's Howson, a critic of the industry, said that proof of work is proof of waste, and that if the world's Bitcoiners got together and agreed to cooperate to make Bitcoin green, it would negate the point of proof of work. I don't know. All right, let's continue on. Sweden's Theden started his letter calling for a ban on proof of work mining, saying the social benefit of crypto assets is questionable. For the regulator, the energy going to mining could be better used elsewhere. Theden cited research by Digiconomist, a project by Dutch researcher Alex de Vries, we got this, who has been a strong advocate against Bitcoin mining. Among other topics, he has quantified the carbon footprint of Bitcoin transactions by comparing the energy intensity and carbon emissions of Bitcoin and a Visa transaction. He found that Bitcoin's carbon footprint per transaction is equivalent to 2,700,562 Visa transactions. This is something I heard too. And I do have a counter to that. But let's see what they say. The Bitcoin community has objected to the comparison and questioned de Vries' background. Researchers at Cambridge University Center for Alternative Finance say that the energy cost per transaction metric is, quote, a purely theoretical measure that has little practical relevance without additional context, end quote. Critics also point out that the researcher works for the Netherlands Central Bank, which they consider a conflict of interest. Fair enough. Bitcoin supporters, like many of the miners quoted in this article, disagree. Mellard thinks that the debate overall focuses too much on the cost of Bitcoin and that the network has other benefits. Quote, yes, Bitcoin consumes a lot of energy, end quote, but this is the price we pay for having a global, permissionless, and censorship-resistant monetary system, he said. So there you go. Now, on the point of amount of transactions per two, you would have to start calculating like every block of every Bitcoin, Bitcoin block being completely full. And I think that definitely changes the numbers here too. What he was comparing it to was, I guess, the average. And then if you're including the average of like when there's not a lot of activity, then we're kind of at a moot point. I hope you enjoyed this clip from the Crypto Mining Morning Show every Monday through Friday, 7:45 a.m. Pacific and 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. You can check out more clips here, or if you're interested in checking out the entire live show, you can check that out down here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday.